QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. Tax line mapping, tax entry for business use of home. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. Here we are in our test tax mapping file within QuickBooks. In a prior presentation, we exported our trial balance to both the tax software, in our case, Lacert, which is owned by Intuit, the owners of QuickBooks, and to Excel, so that we can then do a reconciliation of what is in the books as compared to what is on the tax return, tax adjusting entries. So if I go to the profit and loss, in other words, we see down here that on the Schedule C, we're at 100,000 on the QuickBooks books. If I go into Lacert and I take a look at the profit and loss that was exported directly from the system, we see that we have the 116,582 over here. That is in part due to these items that were in the home office deduction that we need to make an adjustment for. Now, note, one reason you still kind of need some method to do the adjustments, and again, you might just write them down on the bottom of the profit and loss, print it out and write it down, or you might do it more formally in Excel. If it's a longer process, I would do it in Excel. I'd practice doing it in Excel all the time just to get in the practice of doing that. But in any case, you need to be able to do some kind of reconciliation, and you can't really see that reconciliation in the trial balance, even though it's set up in a similar format. So in other words, when we imported the trial balance from QuickBooks, it looks like this. See, we have our similar kind of breakout from the format that we built in Excel, where we have the unadjusted trial balance from QuickBooks, any adjustments, then the book balance, and then we have the tax balance. We're kind of focusing in on this side over here. But note that the bottom line is at 100,000, and it's only showing the 100,000. It's not really reconciling. It's not showing us the reconciliation to what's actually on the tax return from this data, which is something different than that, right? So it's not really as easy for us to do this kind of reconciliation worksheet, even though it looks the same in this software as it is in Excel, at least in my opinion. If you then go to the tax line filing, you can see all these tax lines are mapped out properly. But these items are going to this home office deduction, which is going to cause a problem, meaning you're not going to get this full amount of the deduction. You're only going to get a portion of it, but it's not showing that tax calculation down here, basically in the net income. This is the book net income. So you still need some kind of reconciliation, even though this system helps with the data input. So I'm going to close this back out and take a look at these items. So here we are in the tax return on the Schedule C side. You'll see that the items we're looking at are these adjustments, that $10,418 that are going to be part of the home office deduction reported on Form 8829. Now, when we put this into QuickBooks, these items that would be applicable, we put into the direct line items, we wrote them off to rent, like rent expense. We didn't break them out between personal and business. We just put them in there to the rent expense directly. And we also had the utilities that we broke out between the two as well. So I believe there was a utilities expense. Well, maybe not. But then I also have the repairs and maintenance. That's another one that we broke out. So we wrote the whole thing off here. But when we export it to the tax return, we're only going to get a portion. We're going to have to apply out the portion. Now, you could try to break it out on the profit and loss. But again, when you export it, you need the full amount on the tax return that will then be allocated out. So we put the full amount here, and then it exported to the tax return. That's the full amount, and now we have to use some ratio to apply out the portion that's going to be for the business use. Now, if I go back to the tax return, take a look at that form, which is Form 8829, take a look at that form, and say they're going to use the square footage. We're using the square footage method, basically saying the square footage of the home, 1,200, 500 square feet for the office, 500 divided by 1,200, 41.67%. So we're going to use that 41.67% then to do our calculation. So in other words, if we pull out the trusty calculator, we're saying that our office is 500 square feet divided by the total square feet of the home. That's going to be about 41.67 if we move the decimal place 2 places over. So that's going to be our percentage that we're going to use, and we're going to allocate it to the items that we included. Now, we're not going to get into a lot of detail on which items should be here, but if you have rent, then it might be rent that would go there, and then we had repairs and maintenance that we included in these line items. So these are the differences that we're having because we have them fully deducted in QuickBooks, and we only get a portion of the deduction here, which is going to be that 46 4167. So I need to reconcile for that in my somehow, I'm going to do it in Excel with a journal entry. So I'm going to go then into Excel and make an adjustment for it. So the line items I'm looking at, then I'm saying, okay, well, this one right here, the rent, I'm going to make that one green because we're working on that one. That one needs to be decreased because that's the full amount we paid, and we have to decrease it for the amount that's not going to be for business. And then the other one was repairs and maintenance. So repairs and maintenance. So those two need to be decreased. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my account. You could just type it in there. I like to say equals, and then I'm going to pick up the rent. And I'm going to put these on top, even though they're going to be a credit, which can annoy people. But I think it's easier to do because that's the first ones I'm going to be working with. And then I'm going to take the percentage of those items. So I'll take the trusty calculator, or I can do it this way. I can just say that we have. So I'm going to basically say that, 41.67 is deductible, and we need to remove the amount that is not deductible, that's not going to be included. So it would look something like that 1 minus the 0.4167. So that the 58.33 would be the amount that we need to decrease the expense by. So for example, let's see what that looks like over here. If I go back to the Excel worksheet and say that, okay, I have this number, which took the full amount. I need to decrease it by the amount that's not deductible. So the amount that's not deductible is 1 minus that percentage. So I'll do it this way with a formula. I like to use a formula because it allows me to go back to the worksheet and see what happened when I go back to it. So I can say this is going to be negative, flipping the sign, making it a negative number. I'm going to pick up this 16,000. You got to make sure this column, don't pick it up from this column, or you're going to get a circle reference. And then I'm going to say this is going to be times brackets 1 minus 0.46, what was it? 0.4167, 0.4167. And so that's the amount that is not going to be deductible. I'm going to highlight these two cells and format them like these cells over here now so that I get the bracketed numbers. Right clicking, I'm going to format the cells, and we're going to say I want currency, no $sign, red and bracketed negative numbers, and OK. So there we have it. Now if I post that one item out, just let's see if it does what we would expect. I'm going to say this is going to be equal to that amount in the middle column, and that'll reduce it. So now it's been reduced to that. Which, does that make sense if I pull out the trusty calculator? Because you would think the amount we get to deduct that should be remaining is 16,000 times 0.4167, which would be that amount here. So I'll do the same to the one below it. I'm going to say, okay, this one needs to be negative to flip the sign because I want it to be a credit, that number. And then I'm going to say times, and then 1 minus 0.4167, close the brackets. And so there we have it again. And so there's that. Let's post it out and see if it does what we would expect. I'm going to post it right here and say this equals this negative item. And so there we have it. We're left with this number. Does that make sense? Well, let's pull out the trusty calculator again and say that we have then the 9,000 was what times the 0.4167 is the amount we get to deduct, which should give us that number there. So that's the number that is left then. So I'm going to close this back out. If I add these two up, they add up to 10,417.50. If we go back to the tax return, we've got the 10,418. So that's correct. It's off by $1 because there's rounding. So that looks good. So then we're going to say, well, where does the other half go? Because I want to be in balance still. I still want this to be green zeros down below. Where am I going to put the other side? Now, you could put the other side. You could think, well, this isn't really a business deduction. It's more like a draw. These are personal expenses, and maybe you should put them into draws. Maybe it's a book adjustment rather than a tax adjustment, really, and they should go into draws. Or you could think of it, I just want this as a tax adjustment. I don't want to adjust the draws up here. Instead, I'm going to put it down here to basically a tax line item, and I'm just going to add another line item to below. Let me show you how that would work. It looks a little confusing at first because it seems like we're just moving the expense, but then I'll show you how it works. So I'm going to select these cells. I'm going to add something above it. So I'm going to select them, right click on them, and say insert. And then I'm going to shift the cells down. I want it to format like the cell above it. So if you have this little insert thing, you could say format the same as above, right there. It still didn't do it exactly because it didn't bring the line. So I'm going to select these 3 items here. I'm going to go to the Home tab, Clipboard, Paintbrusher, and then I'm going to paintbrush it so it looks the same. We're going to be saying that this is going to be the Home Office, let's say Office Adjustment. And then you might want to make these like a different color down here to show that these are like tax line items down below. So Home Office Deduction, I'm going to make that, I'm going to put a 0 there, and this is where the other side is going to go. So I'm going to put this in the other side. This is going to be equal to the Home Office Deduction. And then I'm just going to add these up and flip the sign. So they add up to 14,582.50 and flip the sign. I'm going to do that with a negative sum function, negative sum, adding them up, flipping the sign, negative, basically multiplying times -1. So there's the debit. So then I'm going to put the debit down here equals the debit. That'll put us back in balance. So that puts us back in balance. Notice my totals here may not be including that last line. See, if I add these up, it's adding all the way down. This one's not including that last line. So you got to be careful that the totals are picking this up. So I'm going to copy the 0 across and make sure it picks up that last line. So that looks good. And then this item should also be picking up the last line, or you don't have to because it's going to be 0 all the time. But I'm going to pick this one up and move it down. So this is the whole income statement. Now, if I copy this across, if I copy this all the way across, then we see no adjustment here, right? So you would then say, well, what happened? All you did was move this item down here, but what you want to do is on this line, I don't want to see that last item. I'm going to move up the formula and say that one is not part of the tax deduction. That's what the difference is. So I'm going to say okay, and now we have that change. I'm going to do the same thing here so we can see the adjustment. I'm going to move this up a line and say move that up a line. So now I can see what the adjustment, right? So I can add it up this way. This plus this is our adjustment. Or it's the sum of all these items, not including this yellow item down below. Whereas this one is including the yellow item, which was 0 before. And that's how we can kind of format our reconciliation over here, giving us the 2 totals. This is what was on the books. Here's what's on the tax return thus far. The change is this item, the 14,582.50. We can see that here, that ties in, or it doesn't tie in here, but we could see that the deduction then ties in here. These two being the 10,417.50 ties into the 10,418. That then goes into the 1040, and that's going to be not the Schedule C and then the 1040, Schedule C. So that's going to be this adjustment here. So that's part of our difference of that 116,582. It's not the full difference, so we still have some component that we're going to have to reconcile. We can check that out. I can say that's 116,582. Let's go back over here and say, okay, 116,582. If I take the difference between those two, we're still looking for about the 2,000 for an adjustment that is needed.